Welcome. Welcome back to my channel Conquer the Fear. In this video, we are going to discuss about the interview questions which are asked in one of the company persistent system. So one of the person has attended the L2 round over there. He got a package of 31 lakhs and he got selected. So recently the interview had been completed and he got the offer letter over there. So I'm going to share you the exact questions which are asked in the round 2. So please watch this video very carefully because I'm going to explain the questions, also the answers in details. If one of your motive is understanding what kind of interview questions are asked in the real companies like Persistence, this is the right video because you get the exact practical questions, the exact essence of what needs to be answered in those particular questions. So I'm pretty much sure if you cover this particular video to the full length, you will be able to crack that particular interviews which will be coming to you. So be patient and watch the video till the end. Let's discuss the questions which are asked in the interview. The very first question what the interviewer asked is, what is Lisco substitute principle? Now this is one of the principle of the 5 principles of solid principles. So if you are not aware of what is solid principles, please check out my other video which I have made a brief detailed video on that part. Now the Lisco principle is a principle that says if the object of the superclass should be replaceable with the object of its subclass, so it will not break the application. Now in simple terms, let's say you have a base class and then there is a derived class, so you should be able to use the object of a child class anywhere the object of the parent class is expected or available. So the program should not break, it also should behave correctly without the unexpected result over there. So subtypes must be the substitute of their base type as well. Now why it is important? Because it ensures that your inheritance is been correctly used and your derived classes is going to extend the functionality of the base class without you modifying the fundamental behavior of the parent class. Now this is going to promote the code maintainability, the reusability concept and the robustness. So you're going to make the system easier and to extend that particular in a easier way. Now let's take an example of a bird. Now there is a bird class which has got a fly method. Now if you have a penguin which you are going to create as a subclass to bird, so you are going to override fly. Now what if you're like now in this particular fly, you're not going to do anything or else you are going to throw some error because penguin is not going to fly at all. Now if you look at this, this is going to violate the principle of Lisco principle. Why? Because the client is expecting the bird to fly correctly, but this would break as a penguin is not going to fly. Now, in order to design it in a better way, what you could do is that you can change the hierarchy of how you can define those. You can have an animal base class with a bird being the subclass of it. And then on top of that, you can create a flying bird interface. And then if you, the penguin is going to inherit from the bird, but it is not going to implement the flying bird. So in that case, it will be a better way to achieve this. Now let's look at the diagram over here. Now if you see here, the class diagram over here, so this is going to be the bird class, then the penguin, and then if you see the bird, penguin, and this is going to violate over here. So here is the reason we can actually breaks that actually if you are implementing as an old way. Now let's look at the improved version, how we can have this particular better version implemented using the hierarchy. Now already we have mentioned, right, we have the animal, then the bird as a class, and then if you see here, this is going to be the interface created, that is iFlyable over here, which is going to have this fly. Now you have eagle as well, which is going to have the fly, and then penguin, which is going to be specific to that particular thing, which is a non-flying bird. Now if you see here, the animal is going to be the bird, The bird can be an eagle and bird can also be a penguin. So this interface is going to have this particular eagle is going to be implemented over there. So that's how it is going to be implemented in a proper way. So this is how the Lisco principle works. The next question what it was asked is, what are the rules of overriding? Now, when you are trying to override the subclass method, superclass method into your subclass for your own specific implementation, that is going to be provided in the superclass, right? So that is what the method overriding is about. Now, there are certain rules which are given by the Java to adhere to the method overriding, and then what it can do and what it cannot do. Now the method signature must be very, very similar. So your method, you should have, when you're creating a sub method in the subclass, the name should be same, the number of and the types of arguments should be same, and that too in the same order, and it should return the same type, or it can also return the covariant return type. So that is one of the important rule, I would say. Then the access modifier, you can have the same access modifier, or you can have the some more permissive, that is going, which you are trying to override in the from the superclass. So but you cannot reduce the visibility. So let's say if you have a public, you cannot make it as an protected or private. Then the final methods cannot be overridden. So this is an overall concept of final, where if you declare that class as an final, definitely you cannot override it and you cannot subclass it. Then the static members cannot be overridden because static methods are going to be the class level details. So being that it cannot be, so it is going to be a kind of, if you, even though if you try to do it, then it is going to be kind of a method hiding, not overriding concept over here. The private, so private cannot be overridden because they are going to belong to the say that class only where it is written. Then the constructors cannot be overridden. This constructor and the methods cannot be overridden. Then we have the override. So if you are, it is very good practice to write or annotate the override on top of where you are trying to override. So this gives an indication to the compiler internally that this is a method being overridden. Okay. It also tries to detect if you are trying to violate some principles already defined above. Then the exception part, this is quite important. Now the same kind of exception should be having in the overridden method. The subclass of that particular exception declared by the overridden. So you can also have the subclass of that particular exception which is defined in the superclass. Now if there are no exception defined, even the overridden methods declare the same or some of them actually. So that is how you can do that. Now you cannot declare a new or broader checked exception to those which is declared in the superclass. So that's the principles about SQL exception. Now this is very, very important question when it comes to the interview, and this is the most frequently asked interview questions because this gives an understanding whether the person has worked in practically and how he dealt with some SQL injection, the real world problems. Now SQL injection is a technique where the attacker is used to attack the data-driven application, in which he tries to maliciously manipulate the SQL statements which is trying to insert some data into the database. Now, what happens when your application construct your SQL query and you're trying to pass some fields without a validation or without some proper sanitization? So what the attacker does over here is that he manipulates that particular query. He change the internal parameters of it. What he can do, he do the data modification. He can do the unauthorized access related things. He can delete some data. In the same query, he can replace the update query with the delete thing. So in that thing, it's a very, very risky thing. Now consider, let's say you have a login form. In that case, you are trying to pass the username and password. Now your application is going to construct the query like this, where you'll pass the username, you'll pass the password over here. Now attacker, what it can do? Now he can modify this particular simple query, and he can append or modify this particular query along with that with the some conditions like this. Now if you see this condition, this is exactly going to return true because this is 1 is equal to 1. So definitely there is no such thing as false over here for it, and your query will definitely execute and pass it over here. So that's the one of kind of the example of SQL injection. So there are different ways you can stop it, where you can when you can make use of the prepared statement in the Hibernate. We can actually make use of different provisions. So we'll look into that as well in the later videos. Now, how is Hibernate that is going to deal your SQL injection? Now, let's say we discussed the SQL injection topic, that one, right? So it is going in specifically in Hibernate, how you are going to deal that. So now Hibernate, if you are aware, it's an ORM tool for object relational mapping between your database and your Java object. So it is going to deal in the object oriented way of communicating with the database. Now, if you want to prevent the SQL injection attack, then you have to write certain or take some control measures over here. So here, actually, if you see, there is a named parameter or a positional parameter. So Hibernate is going to take that defensive step by using the named parameter, that is the param name, or you can use the positional parameter, which is the question mark in Hibernate SQL, in the JPQL or in the criteria. So when you set this particular value, so internally as this particular JD we see, it is going to be having an implementation of the prepared statement. Now let's take an example over here. If you see, this is going to create a query where you are trying to search from that username. Now this is quite vulnerable because you are trying to directly append that query over here. Now what you can do here is that you can create a query over here and you can give the query parameter over here, the params over here. Now this is where how you achieve this. Now in this way, he cannot modify this particular thing. So in that case, the prepared statement will be created over here. So the threat on this particular parameter is reduced over here. So he is not going to manipulate that thing. Then comes criteria. Now this is part of the it is going to build the queries programmatically using the Java concept. So since you are not concatenating the string in the SQL form, it is going to be very safe for the SQL injection in that case. Similar is the JPA criteria. Now this is going to this is the type safe way of generating the dynamic queries. So this is going to be very safe way to construct that particular object rather than you're trying to create it with the string. So in this way, if you see the criteria builder over here, you're trying to create a user class, and then form over here, then the where clause. So these are all something which we have written programmatically, and there is no way where you can actually modify this thing. So this is going to be a quite interesting way to do that. Then comes the SQL query. You can use your native query, but this has to be used in, I would say, very caution, because the Hibernate allowing your executing the SQL query is using the discrete SQL query. Now, if you're concatenating this particular thing, it is still vulnerable to the SQL injection. So this is the last option, I would say. If you don't have that particular understanding or knowledge, then you can make use of it, but ideally it is discouraged to use this thing. Try to upgrade your knowledge as well in this part and how you can implement that part. Then comes what is the concept of object pooling. Now I would say this is one of the important questions, and in generally this is quite important because this gives an understanding, overall understanding how your Java system works in, how it is dealing with the objects. Because Java is an object oriented language, you need to have a deep understanding of the object oriented language things. Now it is one of the design pattern where we use it in the software development, where you are using it to manage the life cycle of the objects. Now it can be like creating of it, initializing it, then destroying part. But the initializing, the instead of the creating and the destroying part of this particular things are repeated process. So there is an object pool maintained over there, where it is going to be taken from the ready to use objects from there. So when an object is required by somebody, so it is going to get from that particular pool, and then it is going to be used. When it is not no longer needed or not ever available, so it is going to return to that particular pool for further use or for the future use. So it is not going to be garbage collected, but it is going to be go into the object pool. Now, there are some important points like pool. As I said, this is kind of a container which is going to hold your initialized objects over there, and they are all ready to use objects. Then the borrower that they acquire, the client is going to ask for an object, and it is going to get it from the pool there. Then once the client finishes its works, it can return it to the pool. Then there are some idle object pools that are not currently being used up. There are some active objects which are borrowed and been currently used in your systems. There are some maximum number of pools that you can configure so that, let's say you have configured 10, then you cannot create object pools beyond that. So it is going to limit your resources over there. It is going to have a controlled environment and you can play it around it over there. Now, when do we use? When you want your performance to be improved. So that is when we use that. Then we can use it when you want to do a proper resource management. So you can limit that particular number of instances which can be created. Let's say you want to reduce your memory footprint. So instead of creating the n number of connections or objects like that, you can ask it to reduce that particular limitation wherever it is using. So you can reduce the pressure on the garbage collector. So this is going to have some fewer garbage collection pause timings, and potentially the overall memory consumption would be less over here. Also, the initialization cost is going to be drastically reduced because we are trying to significantly reduce the time or the resources which is going to be required at the initial setup time. Now, what are the common use cases when we use this object pooling? Now, you must have already known the object pooling concept where database we require some connection, we can release the connection, we can again connect it and use it. So in that case, instead of you trying to create the connection every time, you take it from the object pool. Then it is similarly, it is applying to the thread pool. So you create a number of threads already at once, and then you can start reusing them whenever it is required and the thread which is available. Then there can be a network socket pooling in that case where you have this particular open and close the network connections over there. Then we talked about the object pooling, which is going to be a very costly operation where you're trying to instantiate those particular objects. This is how it works. Now, what are the rules of REST API? Now, this is quite important. There can be n number of questions which can be asked with the REST API, like what are the rules? What is REST API? How would you design it with the Spring Boot? So there are different aspects of questions which can be asked up. So be prepared with the whole REST API thing. So now in this way, in this question interview, it was asked about what are the rules. Now when you're dealing with the REST API, first of all, you need to have an understanding of what exactly the REST is. Now, the REST is representational state transfer. It's an architectural type where you're dealing with a distributed hypermedia system. Now, this is not I would say, a strict protocol thing way, but it is going to be a simple guidelines where it is going to tell you what are the constraints, how you can scale, or we can reliably design an effective system over there. So when you're dealing with the client server architecture, so you need to have a proper segregation between the user interfaces, the data where the data is getting stored up, the server it is exactly. So this is going to have your system much more portable, much more scalable, and they are going to have it worked in the independent in a model of client server model. Then statelessness. Now each of this particular client request must contain all the information which is required to process that request. The server should not store any of the client information on the server side or anything over there. So that is going to improve your scalability part. Then comes the cacheable part. Now, let's say you want some responses to be stored up or cached up. So in that case, you can make use of the cacheable concept where the response is required to be used multiple times, and like it can be possible that number of other servers might require to load that same details. Then you need to have a uniform interface. Now this is important constraint, I would say. Now you can have a proper resource identification in your request. You can have this particular URI properly being defined. Then you have resource manipulation through representation. Now client can manipulate certain resources by using JSON, XML as those particular resources. So you should have enough information to modify or delete that particular resources. Then comes the descriptive messages. So each message should include certain information like what is the content type, accept type, and etc. to indicate what the data is being exchanged between the client and the server. Now, HETIAs, this is quite important. When the client wants to interact with the application solely using the hypermedia, this is the way we do it. Now, the response will include, let's say the client requests something. In that response, you will get some relevant links or the resources or the set of actions which will guide you for the next step of actions you can do. So this in this way, it will give you some information along with your applications where you're trying to invoke, but this is going to make your API much more discoverable and very less tightly coupled. Now we have a layered system. So client is not, cannot directly or ordinarily tell what is connected directly to the end server. So this is going to be, there are going to be a load balancer in between. There are going to be some cache proxies in between. Now this is going to be an additional layer over here. So we can have some security thing enabled over here, load balancing system enabled. So it is not affecting the client and the core business of logic in the server side. Then comes what is serialization and deserialization. Now this is quite important because out of 10, I think 9 of them definitely has this particular one or other questions with respect to the serialization. So you need to be very thoroughful with this particular concept. Now you must be aware serialization is converting an object state, the data and the information into a format that can be stored and transmitted in certain way over the network. Now the goal of that particular serialization is to flag that particular object so that when you're trying to create an object based on that particular thing, you should be able to do that. Now you can use JSON, XML to reconstruct that particular object later time, but the main purpose is to persist this particular data and as an object into certain, let's say either in the database or either in some file, etc. So that you can create that particular instance again using those particular details. Now, let's say you want to send some information between the applications or the processes over the network, then we can use it for that using this particular file process. Then comes caching. Let's say you're trying to store something in a cache for faster retrieval. So what happens, like you, instead of hitting the database every time, you try to store it in some location in a file where you can frequently access that thing. Now, similar to the process of serialization, we have deserialization where the conversion or the process is completely reversed, where you're trying to reverse that particular process of object creation from the flat file, that is the object which you have converted. So ideally, the once you convert that particular object to a byte stream, the byte stream again has to be converted to an object. So that's the whole process of creating the original object with the same state and other details so that you can use it whenever you want it. Now let's take an example. In order to make your class serializable, the first thing is that you need to have a serializable interface implemented. Now this is a marker interface. Now it will have no methods, but it is going to give an indication to the compiler of the Java that is a special kind of class, and we should consider this as an serializable. Now you must have already seen when you're trying to create a POJOs or persistent class where you will be implementing those serializable interface over there. So that's the reason you indicate that particular JVM that this is a certain class where you have to treat it in a different way. Now, if you see here, I'm trying to create a user over here. What happens over here is that in this particular serialization, I'm trying to first convert that particular object over here. and then create an object over here. Then what I'm trying to do with the help of the serialization process, now if you make a note of here, I'm trying to create an object over here. Now where exactly it is going to create in this particular location, then the reverse process is from that particular same file whatever we have created, we can read that particular and create that particular object, and then you will be able to use it further. Okay, that is the advantages over here. Now, what is the read resolve method in the deserialization process? Now, interviewer might directly ask you this particular question, or he might say that, let's say he can give you one program and he say that, this is an serialization process, and then he write a code that he says that this is an deserialized version. But if you see and you compare that, well, creation, that then the object is different, has got a different hash code. Now he says that in spite of I being, overriding this particular, what do you say, method has been converted to the object. Now these are two different objects. Why it is the case? Because I have converted that, I should get the same object. Now in order to solve that process, to create the same instance where the deserialization process is trying to create it with a new instance, you need the read resolve methods to be implemented. Now, this particular method is going to ensure that you have a much more control over the creation process from the objects you are trying to create. So in that case, in this particular read resolve method, you are going to write your own mechanism to create it. So instead of the object which was created by the deserialization process, it is going to return the same instance over there. So that's how it is going to create it. Now, the purpose of using the deserialization or the read resolve method is, now it is used in the singleton pattern. So in most common use cases, I would say, if you have a class, let's say it is going to implement a single pattern. Now deserialization process is going to create the new instance. Now in this case, what will happen? The singleton which was there is going to violate the singleton design pattern over here. So when you're trying to resolve this, let's say you want to create a same instance, then in that case, you make use of the read resolve over here. Okay, so in this case, you should see here. Now, if you look at this particular thing, I have highlighted it over here. So instead of, trying to, it is going to return the same instance of that, and instead of newly creating it. So that's how it will. Now, remember I told you the example of where you're trying to compare it. This will actually show that, these are two same objects over there when you try to get the reserialized object. Now, the object replacement, so basically it is going to replace that particular object with the canonical instance over there. Now, what is the database pooling and why it is used? Now, this is quite important because database connection pooling is an important concept where you want your application to be much more optimized using your while managing the database connection. So instead of trying to establish the connection every time on a single operation, you have a database connection pool maintained somewhere in the application or a cache where you open that, you use that particular database connection. Now, when an application is going to need some connection, it will quickly get that, and then it will perform its operation. So that's how we make use of it. Now, what is the benefit of it? Because it is going to significantly improve your performance because there is a less overhead of creating the new connections. The resources will be consumed less. Now, in this case, there is also a high throughput because the time spent on this connection creation process is eradicated over here. So it is concurrently handled. It is handled by the system over there. Resource management, it is all the limited finite number of connections are created, so you are quietly managing your resources in a better way over there, so preventing your application from creating the unnecessary resources on the server. Then scalability wise, you write your connection in a very reusable way, efficient way, so you can scale it better with a large number of concurrent users request over there. Then you have this particular reusability and stability. So connection pools is going to validate if either there is still a connection available or not, or is going to automatically re-establish that connection which was already broken. So in that case, it is going to improve your application resilience over there. Then it's quite simple. You don't have to worry about the complexity of writing, opening the connection, then doing something else, and then every time over there, right? So you can use it, reuse it. Then what is Hashmap versus concurrent Hashmap? Now this is quite important because in collections, whatever he asks about, he definitely going to ask one or another questions with respect to the hash map or concurrent hash map. Or indirectly, he might come to give you an example. Let's say I want this particular scenario to be achieved. Which one is the correct solution for it, or which is the correct appropriate collection you can use it when it require from the Java collection. Now, these two collections are the implementation of the map interface. In order to have this particular proper understanding, you need to have an overall understanding of the collections and its hierarchy. What are the interfaces? What are the implementations? What is the hierarchy? That's all. So, this is going to be a map is what the key value store implementation. So basically, they are thread safety wise, and then how you can handle that particular concurrency. So this is there is a difference between these two. So in the way it deals, we'll understand that. Now, hash map, if you look at it, this is going to be a not thread safe method. So it is used for a single threaded environment where you are not very much worried about a synchronization process, or you are not dealing with very large data set. Performance wise, you are generally having the best performance in the single threaded environment because there is no overhead of synchronization you need to take care. Now, behavior-wise, the concurrent environment, if multiple threads are trying to modify your hash map, in like if you have no proper implementation of this external synchronization, then there can be a possibility of inconsistent data. So there are some infinite loop happening. There can be some modification happening. Then it will throw a concurrent modification exception. So iterator is going to create it on that particular map, and this is a fail fast implementation. The hash map is a fail fast a collection, so which is going to throw a concurrent modification exception. Now you are only allowed one null value key and the value key over there, and then the multiple values over there. So that in that case you use the hash map over there. Now concurrent hash map, this is one of the thread safe version of the hash map. Whatever the concept we have discussed, this is going to be the thread safe version. Now this is going to be used when you want a high performance concurrent access of that particular application. So in performance wise, this is going to be performing well when you are dealing with the multi-threading environment as well. So constant read write without unnecessary blocking the exact thing can be done over here. Now there are majorly two common concurrency approaches here. If you so let's say you are using your version prior to it, there is another concept, and then later when you are working on a later version than Java 8, there's a different concept. Now earlier prior to Java 8, what it used to happen, we used to have a segment level locking. Now this was divided into a different segments, and each segment was locked internally independently over there. Now, this used to allow the concurrent access to that particular different segments over there. But after the Java 8, it has been switched to much more granular, much more lock-free approach that is making use of the cache, that is compare and swap operation. And also it is called the node level locking, that is bin locking. Now in this case, it is going to synchronize the block of that particular hash bins or the node themselves rather than that particular segment over there. Now what happens, this is going to have that much more fine grained control of the locking process. So it is where it is going to only affect that particular specific bin which is being locked during the write process. So other can read where it is not being non-blocked over there. Now, behavior-wise, if you see when it will not throw the concurrent modification except because it is going to reflect some changes. It is going to iterate which was already created. So it will not throw any exception over there. And you do in this particular concurrent hash map, you are not allowed to store either null or key values over there. Then we have what is the segment level locking work in the concurrent hash map. Now we already discussed segment level locking is called strict locking, and this was one of the primary mechanism or the primary way prior to Java 8 how the concurrent hash map was dealt. So segmentation wise, the concurrent map internally used to have an entire hash table into a fixed number of smaller independent segments. Now each segment was essentially a separate hash map in itself. Now as each segment had its own independent lock over there. Now the operation which were happening, let's say the most of the operation which were happening could be proceeded concurrently without the any lock being acquired over there. Then the write operation, the thread need to perform write operation. It would specifically identify which particular segment where the key value pair would reside and then acquire that particular lock only on that particular segment over there. Now, because of the, it had the high concurrency, so different segment could be locked up independently. Multiple threads can concurrently perform the write operation on a different part of the map. For example, let's say one thread had a, you can add the entry at the segment A, while the another thread can simultaneously add an entry in the segment B. So there were great reduction in the when you compare with the normal synchronized map or when you compare it with the hash table or a synchronized hash map. So this was a better option when it comes to dealing that way. Now, if you look at this particular example, there were like 16 segments over here. Now, if one of the threads try to put some key inside the hash, let's say in the segment 5. So what happens? It is going to log that particular segment. Along with that, there will be another thread which is going to put the key inside to the segment 10. Now, what it will happen? It will log that particular segment. Now, both this operation can perform in a different parallel in a same parallel way where it will log the different and independent segment over there. So if a thread 3 tries to put some element in the hash code, let's say thread 5, it would have to wait over there because the thread 1 is has to release that particular log for the segment 5. So that in that way it is to deal that particular concurrency part. Now post Java 8, as we already discussed, the internal implementation of the concurrent hash map was uh, slightly revised. So it is not going to use the segment level things. Now instead it is going to rely on the much more fine-grained locking approach, lock-free approach that is called as a compare and swap operations. Now in this there will be a synchronized block on the individual hash table, the bin. So when your connections is going to occur over there. So this is one of the modern approach where it is going to increase the performance, increase the scalability under your high performance concurrency over there. Now the term segment level locking especially used to be referred when you had that prior to Java 8. Now in this particular interview there was also a coding question asked. Now, whether it is a normal Java logical questions or whether it is specifically trying to understand whether you are having an understanding of Java 8 and its feature, interviewer will try to, in every aspect, to give you at least two programs in an interview. So make sure you get prepared with this particular technical coding questions because the questions can be anything because there are millions of questions which can be asked out of that. So you need to be prepared with the most frequently asked interview questions or the most frequently asked real world coding challenge questions. So these are all dependent on the problem, and then he asked you to give a solution to it. What he basically tries to understand what is your approach, how you are going to write it in an efficient way, what are the data structures you are going to use. So these are all things which will be looked up when you try to lively code in front of him. So that's the reason he asks you to write that particular code in front of you because when some certain problem is thrown at you, he wanted to understand what is your approach to it. Now, if you look at this particular problem statement, the very first question it was asked, like he will give you a list and he will say that I want to understand whether this particular list is positive dominant or the negative dominant. So what will happen? So he will give you a list. In that, if you see, there is 1, -5, -6, -8 and 2. Now, ideally, if you look at this small list, you will be able to understand it is negative dominant because you see more number of negative elements inside it. Now, in that case, how you can achieve this is using the programmatic Java way. So I am going to give you the exact code, what exactly it was, how he has written that particular code, and what the approach he had used. I have written a class over here. Now, if you take a look at it, I have created one array list over here. Same whatever actually shown as an input. Now, if you look at this, I'm calling one check dominance method over here, which I'm passing the list over here. Now, the logic is written exactly over here. Now, if you see, this list is coming over here. Now, what he has done, he had make use of the Java streams, Java 8 features over here. Now, there is also a possibility that whether he wants you to achieve without Java 8, or there also he might ask you that, I want this particular solution to be developed in Java 8, because he wanted to understand whether you are able to apply the logic or whether he is able to understand whether you are aware with a proper implementation of that particular logic and how you can do it with the latest and versions over here. Now you see here there is a concept of filter which been applied over here, where you're trying to gather all the positive elements from this, and then you're getting the count over here. Then I'm trying to get the same kind of approach, but here I'm trying to see what are negative over here. Then ultimately, I have written a block over code over here, which is going to return me whether it is positive, whether it is negative, or whether it is neither negative or neither positive. In case of, let's say there are 6 elements, and out of that there are 3 positive and 3 negative. In that case, it is neither dominant of any of the sides. Now let's try to run this particular program and see. Now, if you look at this, you see here this is negative dominant. Now, let's look at the second one. If you see, there are only 2 negative of them. That's the reason it is the positive. Now, if you look at this, this is negative. If you see 1, 2, and 3, now 0 is not captured inside this. That is the reason it is the negative dominant. Now, if you look at this, this is again, if you see these 2 are negative, 2 are positive, and hence it is neither dominant. So in this way, you can write this particular logic. I hope I was able to explain you properly how the implementation on the what is the approach. Now, the second question, whatever it was given after 7-8 minutes of solution by the previous question, he was given another program where he was asked to write a problem using the Java 8 and Java without Java 8. So he was asked to write any of your options, whether you can write it in Java 8 or whether you can write in the normal Java way. That's your approach, but you want a output like this, whether the input he is going to give you is 5, so it should print in the reduced format. So the number of times it should keep reducing each by each until it reduces to 1. So let's say he gives you 10, then in that case the first 10 should be print 10 times, then the 9 should print 9, and ultimately jot down to 1. Now let's look at the approach. Now, firstly, I have written this particular code in the normal without Java 8 code. Now, if you look at this, I have written a print pattern method over here. Now, if you look at this, I've just checked out whether this particular integer is positive or not. Then I have actually added for loop over here, where I'm trying to get the number in the outer loop. So this is going to be a much more from the top version to the lower version, basically. So here it will start from the length of it, the number from it actually, basically the number which is given. Now it will ultimately move down till 1 over there. Then there is another loop which is going to control how many times it will be printed over there. So let's say that particular same number of I will be given over here, and then it will print that particular thing over here. So it will print that many times over here. So in that case, in the same line it will print. So if you see here, there is no println, it will just print over there. So it will be printing in the same line. Ultimately, it will go to the next line and then it will print in. So let's try to run this. Now, if you see here, the output, it is similar to what the expectation from the query, which was asked. Now, similar to this, same thing has been written in the Java 8. So it's either up to you whether you are trying to implement that in Java 8, similar. Now here, if you see, there is one print pattern method which I have written, taken the same input. Now I made use of the instream over here, where it is trying to map that particular to this number of logic over here. Then it is trying to get that particular element for each time. And then from that particular range, whatever we have given, is going to print that thing over there. So it is going to map it over the values over there. Ultimately, it is going to join that particular over here and print it over there. So let's try to run this. See here. Now, what is orchestration and choreography? Now, this is one of the important when it comes to microservice interview based questions. And if you are specifically attending any interview which is related to Java, Spring Boot, microservices, advanced technologies. So here, the choreography and orchestration are the two common design patterns which are used for if you are dealing with the distributed systems. Now, these are the two types of saga design pattern. So he might ask you indirectly, what is this particular design pattern? What is saga design pattern? What are the two kinds of implementation? What is the difference between them? So you might get to understand what exactly whether you are aware of the design patterns and the applications or the implementation of it. Now let's discuss what is orchestration. Now orchestration is one of the centralized way to control the rest of the services. So what is happening? A single intelligent component or a service would be there which is going to take the responsibility of defining and executing the workflow. So here it will call the other services which are calling from that particular services, and it is going to handle the response, and then ultimately it will give you the overall flow over there. So if you look at the characteristic, it is centralized. So every workflow will flow from this. It is going to coordinate everything over there. You can make use of synchronous or asynchronous process, like you can call it. Then we can actually make use of tightly coupled workflow as well. And then it is quite easy to debug when you're trying to check whether there's something has went wrong to in one place or any other place. Now this is very suitable for the applications, let's say very complex application, whether you are running a very long processes where there is some strict order to be maintained. So in that case, saga implementation of orchestration can be used up over there. Then we have the choreography pattern. Now in this is going to be a decentralized process or the control, where each of this particular service is going to have their own role to play, and they will overall work in sync with each other. Now the service is going to react to certain events which are thrown by the other services, and then it is going to act on their own task. Particularly, it is going to again emit the new events so that the other services can act accordingly. So there is going to be it is not going to be similar to the orchestration process where there was a central coordinator dealing with it. Now, the main part is it is decentralized logic. Second, it is going to be an event-driven way where you're communicating using the asynchronous process. And then we are going to, it is much more loosely coupled because your service is not dependent on the other services to either consume it or act accordingly and get the immediate response over there. So other services will at their own time can consume it and do the rest of the process. Now scalability and the resilience wise, it is easy to scale because there is no dependency, and also it makes itself so resilient so that it can handle those particular failure over there. Then we have it is the problem with this is actually it is got very difficult when you're trying to debug something. So you have to track it to span it for the multiple services and track those particular events so that you identify that particular root cause. So let's say where to use this, it is ideally when you are independently trying to interact and you want to design something very, very loosely coupled or a decoupled application. In that case, we can make use of. Let's say you want some notification application systems or some propagation system. In that case, we can make use of it. So if you go with the difference wise, so in interview I might ask you what is the difference between orchestration and choreography. So we already discussed one is centrally managed, one is decentrally managed. Then one is going to have the service which is going to be the logic will work in from one services, and then other is like it is going to be in a distributed. So each service is going to handle its own logic and role to play. Then communication wise, this is going to be mostly the synchronous process, or it might be commands based async process. Typically, the choreography is asynchronous process where it make use of the message broker. Now, tightly coupling, this is very tightly coupled when it comes to the choreography orchestration process. So that is the reason it is known as an orchestration. Then this choreography is loosely coupled services where independently it is going to perform. Now, visibility wise, it is quite easy to maintain this flow, but as to compare to the other, it is going to be very hard over here. Then complexity wise, it is easier, but this can be a little bit complex over here as it involves overhead over there. Then sometimes the bottleneck, what the problem with this is that when you're trying, this can become a bottleneck for it. But when it comes to this particular process, it is highly scalable because it is highly independent service, which is going to operate. Now, the failure rate or the failure of orchestration can halt the overall workflow. So this is not that resilient, but there are you have to handle in certain way. But this particular process is much more resilient and it is able to tackle your failure systems. Now, debugging wise, it is quite easy. This is much more challenging wise. Now, there are different tools which we are used when you're dealing with the saga design pattern, like BPM tools and other tools. Then we have event driven architecture like Kafka and other things we can make use of it. Now, when to use this, we already discussed when you want that multiple steps to be tracked up in a strict order. In that case, we need to use this. And let's say choreography is where you are trying to have the maximum services to be decoupled service. So you are not tightly coupling that particular applications. In that case, we can use choreography over there. Now, that's all for this particular video as a part one. I am going to make or upload the other part 2 version as this particular video has become little bit longer now. I would like you all to give an attention to this particular video so that you are grasping the concept thoroughly. Thank you for watching so far. If you want to look out for the second part of this video, please check out my channel where I have uploaded that particular video as well.